Surf's up, it's Mauisnake here, or should I be saying, yeehaw, it's Mauisnake here, because I'm here in Dallas, working at IEM Dallas, and we're going to be talking with Pinnacle what the outright odds are of every team and how that's sort of shaping our expectations going into this event. As a reminder, outright odds are when you bet a single dollar, you will be receiving that plus the outright multiplier if you are correct for who wins the tournament. So as you can see right here at the bottom right of your screen, if you bet a single dollar on Nouns to win the entirety of IEM Dallas, then you would win $121.66. Check out Pinnacle's link in the description box below to just kind of look up your updated odds for matchups, because sometimes I just think it's honestly interesting. If you're not going to even bet, sometimes it's kind of cool to just see, oh, who's favored in this one according to Pinnacle. And yeah, just check their website out. I honestly think that Pinnacle are some of the strongest bookmakers in the space in terms of odds. Usually find that their percentages look very correct. And so sometimes it's just honestly fun to browse. I am not betting given my position in the space, but check out their website anyways. All right, we're going to tier these teams at IEM Dallas based off of Pinnacle's odds, and I'm going to more or less tell you, do I think that's accurate, and I'm going to tell you maybe some storylines going in with these teams too. So first off, we obviously have Nouns, North America's representative of this event. They were able to get through the North American qualifier, and they really didn't beat any teams that were too impressive. They beat Team 1 in the grand finals of that one, and Nouns are a really great team in that they are definitely above a lot of the other Tier 2 North American teams. They were a map away from actually qualifying to the major because they won a map off of Liquid at the RMR for the Americas event. That was pretty scary for Liquid, but honestly, you have to give Nouns a little bit of credit, but they are still definitely in the bottom tier. I will consider them the F tier for this event. Next up, you got EG, similar odds. Actually, it's the exact same odds, and they're really not been doing too much of anything also. I actually think they've been looking worse than Nouns, all things considered, but Pinnacle are just going to give you these really fantastical odds on both of these teams. And another team I will consider in the F tier is going to be 9Z. Yes, 9Z didn't even qualify for the Americas RMR. They've been beating some local Brazilian competition. I think they actually beat MIBR in the ESL Challenger Katowice tournament so that they were able to qualify to a Challenger event, but they didn't even qualify for the RMR itself. And if you're not coming out of the Americas region closed qualifiers to make it to the RMR, it's impossible to think that you're actually going to be performing and doing anything really against international competition. D tier, starting here, is going to begin with Greyhound, who showed that they actually can win games against international competition, which is what they did at the recent major. But I just like, as a whole, it's really tough to believe that this team's going to be doing anything too substantial. Their opening matchup we see against Cloud9, and Cloud9 feels like a team that would just feast on them. But who knows? Cloud9 can be a little bit weird and a little bit shaky at times, so it wouldn't surprise me completely to see Greyhound do some damage at this in terms of just kind of be annoying, play spoiler here and there, but they'd still be in my lowest tier. Next up in the D tier is going to be Complexity. I think these odds may have been made before the announcement was made that Sonic will likely be replacing Halzerk. That was just announced a couple hours ago, and it seems pretty likely unless within 24 hours a visa issue is resolved for Halzerk, which does that ever happen, guys? I don't think so. So rounding out the D tier, we're going to have OG at 55x. And this is a team that almost feels like they're a little bit undervalued, but I also think like the likelihood that they're going to be winning this event is so slim. But it's just like you don't really know because they're going to be playing with Regali how good they're going to do, but the miracle run to win this is rather unlikely. Next up, I'm going to be moving up to the C tier, and we're finally going to be talking about Fnatic. This team has been enigmatic during their recent tournament performances. They beat G2 to knock G2 out 1-3 in the Legend stage, but then they lost Into the Breach in the 2-2 game to figure out who's going to actually qualify for the playoffs, and that was pretty crazy. I mean, you really felt like Fnatic maybe got in their own heads in that one, and this team actually is surprisingly kind of good, but with playing with Forest also, which I don't know if these odds reflect, given that he's going to be standing in for them, it does seem pretty unlikely that Fnatic is going to be winning anything with a guy that his last official experience was in February with a Boomer Demons team where he's playing with Get Right, Freiburg, Olaf, and Lekro, and they lost to Viperio, which is just an Irish team, Irish English team. So yeah, pretty unlikely to see Fnatic really punching too high above their weight in this one. But that brings us to Maus. And Mao's here at 25x is still in the C tier according to Pinnacle, and I think that's fair given their recent results, which have been rather abysmal. But I also think that Mao's are going to be looking at this event and saying to themselves, we need to do well at this. We need to be winning this one. And given that their opening matchup is against Fnatic, I think that gives them a really solid chance to not only win, but then just put themselves in a position where they believe that they can qualify. Because the other teams in their bracket are Heroic, who they would probably play in that upper bracket semis, and they would probably lose. But then also you have these teams like Furia, OG, G2, and Nouns. And if you get lucky with those draws, like, let's say from the other side of the bracket, G2 makes it out, Heroic makes it out, and you're looking for that third team there, you would probably favor Furia over them, but that's about it. That's about it. So you can maybe see Mao's actually making it to the playoffs, but I wouldn't expect them to obviously win, which is why you would get 25 times your money for betting on them to win it all. Next up, in what I will now be moving to as the B tier is Furia. 16x on your money, and this is a team that obviously bombed out of the Legend Stage 0-3, didn't show too much of a fight. They've changed their style up quite a bit from what we are used to, where they're not just going crazy, aggressive. Like, Art is still fighting a lot early on, but they're trying to slow rounds down a little bit more. They're trying to play a more sophisticated European style, and I think that really came back to bite Furia at the Major, because even though it was fairly successful at the RMR, where they were able to capture the Legend spot, they didn't show themselves to be that same team that they even showed in Rio, where they kind of had a little bit of a home crowd buff, a little bit of a more motivation buff, because at the Major, they just fell completely flat. So in some ways, that's why I think when you look at Mao's odds right there with 25x versus Furia's, I almost in some ways recent results don't reflect this, but I almost feel like they should be more even. I just feel like Furia hasn't really captured that style yet, whereas Mao's is going to come into this one super hungry. But we also just saw from Twitter that Exertion was on a 40-hour travel day, which is another reason maybe you would count out Mao's a little bit more. Still in this same tier is going to be Astralis, 12x. And yes, they actually are pinning Astralis to do better than Furia at this one, which is a bit surprising given that Astralis weren't at the Major and they've just been playing in a handful of CCT events. And Blamef had this really interesting tweet where he talked about how he actually believes in his team because they were able to win the recent CCT where they beat Eternal Fire in the grand finals. And I think that's good for Astralis' confidence, to be honest. But when you look at the other teams they beat OG in the semis, Aurora in the quarterfinals, and then they beat Iron Branch in the round of 16. That's not really that impressive to me, but it's nice to see that they were able to develop some consistency at that event. But I still don't really necessarily think that Astralis are a team that are going to come out and surprise us too much. Like if they make playoffs, I think everybody's going to be like, whoa, that's good. And I guess they could. I'll say that. I guess they could make it to playoffs. The bracket that they're in is Team Liquid in the first round matchup. And then even if they win that, they'd probably be playing Cloud9. And I just don't see them getting through either of those teams, frankly. I think Liquid and Cloud9 are in better form. And then he'd be in the lower bracket against teams like FaZe, ENCE, maybe a Complexity that's doing better than we think, or maybe even Greyhound just plays a little bit better than we think. So I'm not really too sold on this Astralis one, but that's what Pinnacle has them as. I would have probably thought their odds should be lower for this, but who knows? Like a playoff run doesn't seem impossible. Let's say that. Next up in the B tier is going to be ENCE at 9.6 odds, and you're going to see that Liquid actually have the same odds. And I think that is actually okay. I think that's kind of weird that they have the same odds because Liquid were actually, I'd say, they looked better at the Major to me. They fell a little bit short to Apex, but Apex has actually proven to be a pretty solid team given that they just made it through ESL Challenger Europe and are qualified now to ESL Pro League. So I actually think that Liquid should probably feel a little bit better, and I feel like Liquid should have almost like worse odd. Like if Liquid were at 7.5 odds versus ENCE's 9.6, I think that would make more sense to me. But they actually pinned them to have the same odds, and I think that's actually almost extra foolish because I think Liquid are going to be playing with some more fire here. They're going to be playing with Nitro, his retirement tour on the horizon. He's going to be riding into the sunset, and I think Liquid are going to be, if anything, they're going to power up in this kind of event. Like this is an event where like Liquid or Nitro drove to this event. By the way, he drove to this event from his home, and so this is a weird one where I think Liquid should actually have a better chance. 9.6 seems like a good value for them, and I almost feel like Pinnacle are undervaluing how good Liquid could do at this. Then I'm going to move into my A tier here, and that's going to start with FaZe. So 4.9, you could see a huge decrease, and I think FaZe's form is just all over the place for me. It's so hard to read where this team is at all points in time. Their first round matchup will be against EG, and the second round they're going to be playing the winner of ENCE or Complexity. To me, that reads like a pretty strong likelihood that they're going to make playoffs, but ENCE could still upset them. So I'm not entirely sold on that, and I think that if they go through the other side of the bracket, or I mean, if they lose to ENCE, let's say, then it's hard to see one team really owning them. Like, it would probably have to be Liquid or Cloud9. So it's actually totally possible they don't make it through their Group B. And I think Group B is decidedly harder than Group A. I know you guys don't see that, but I think that's something to consider when kind of looking at these odds. So FaZe, I wouldn't have mind seeing them at like 7.x odds, but the thing is with FaZe, you just know they can always power up, which is so crazy that we have seen this so many times, that like at ESL Pro League they were not the favorites to make it through, and yet they still got it done. So next up, C9, basically the same odds as FaZe, because this is their home event. If you remember last year, I was able to get the crowd to cheer USA, USA for Cloud9. And they actually said in interviews that helped them drastically. And I believe it, because when you get a little bit of more positive reinforcement, like some teams say they can just play the villain card, like Heroic, but we've seen them crumble on these big stages over and over again when they're booed and when everybody's against them. And so when they lost at the fall finals 2 years ago to Astralis because the crowd was booing them, you would have thought that they'd built up their nerves a little bit, but the only thing they've captured since then has been the following fall finals. And so with Cloud9, this is actually like their Super Bowl. Like this is a tournament where Cloud9 really are coming in, having missed the major in humiliating fashion. Yeah, their last loss wasn't maybe as humiliating to FaZe, even though the way that they lost it down or up 14-5 T-side Mirage and then unable to win that, like Cloud9 are coming into this one with such a vengeance that I see them being able to play very well. I think that they could have worked on things also, and I could expect that going into this, there's a very high likelihood that we see a slightly renewed Cloud9 in terms of playbook. And what I liked from them before at other events when they had big bad losses is sometimes they would change some of their strats here and there, and they most certainly did. There's no way you went a whole major not playing it and didn't try to swap some things up. So we're actually going to likely see a pretty renewed Cloud9, and I actually think that Cloud9 to me they're probably in my like A+ tier here. And the other team that is going to join them is going to be G2 according to Pinnacle at 4.39, practically the same as Cloud9. You're kind of splitting hairs between those two odds. And yeah, with G2 not making the playoffs of the major, and for like these odds are a little weird because you think of most recent results and like Liquid are, let's look back at Liquid's odds, 9.62 versus 4.3. And yet Liquid made the playoffs and G2 went 1-3 in the legend stage. Like, we know G2 has a higher ceiling than Liquid, and what's crazy about this is you look at it as like the ceiling of these teams is what matters so much more to Pinnacle than actually recent results and what we would consider to be form. Because if you looked at form and recent results, FaZe and Liquid should be pretty even, and yet they are clearly not. But in terms of ceiling, that's why teams like Cloud9 and G2 are even higher, because we just believe that their ceiling's higher. Which is also weird because FaZe have a high ceiling too, but I guess it's not too far different when you look back at all those. G2 should also be coming into this tournament wanting to win it all. They had a hugely disappointing run at the major, a very frustrating loss. I think that there's a lot of people, a lot of naysayers out there right now that really are targeting G2. And so G2 in some ways are battling on two fronts. They're battling the match that's in front of them, and they're also losing this fight on social media where there is seemingly multiple campaigns directed against them that are saying, boot someone from this team, change something on the roster, because we saw what they were able to do at the World Finals. We saw what they did at Katowice, winning both of those events and looking like seemingly on the cusp or on the precipice of defining and creating an era for themselves, but it clearly never happened. That didn't happen. That was stomped in the ground. But this is a time for them to kind of reignite those conversations and use whatever embers are still burning and try to just to reignite a new flame for this team. So if G2 are able to accomplish that with this event win, then I think a lot of people are going to have to just shut their mouths a little bit. And I think that's exactly what G2 want to do. They want to shut people up about all the flaws that people are seeing, all the cracks that are showing. The only team that occupies Pinnacle's S tier in my eyes is Heroic. 3.02 odds. These are just like 3x against the field. Like that's you really actually have to feel great about Heroic to do that, because if you had those odds against you, like you're basically saying in the reverse that you would bet $100. Like think of it like this. Doing a little bit of math here. If you're going to get 3 times your money to bet on Heroic, you would probably get 1/3 your money to bet the field. And I would bet the field against Heroic. I think I would do that. I think I would do that. Like to get 1/3 of my money, bet $100 to win 33 on top of it to bet against Heroic. I think that's a safe bet at a tournament like this, because everybody's coming in with all these different motivation factors. The one thing is that Heroic, we know, are the most consistent team. It always feels like they are guaranteed a semifinals at worst. And that is why I think Pinnacle have them here. Recent form shows that of all these teams, actually, they've been the strongest, losing to Gamer Legion. And then you would kind of actually just consider like Vitality. If you actually just wanted to use recent results, the only teams better than them, theoretically, are potentially Apex, Vitality, and Gamer Legion. Like that's using extreme recency bias, but in terms of just what Heroic have done over such a long period of time now, they're going to make the semifinals of this event almost surely. It'd be such a huge disappointment if they didn't, and that's why they are on these odds. Yeah, guys, that's going to be it. Thanks for watching once again. Still trying to like figure out exactly what the format I want to do with Pinnacle on all these videos are, because we have a couple more videos that we're going to be working together on. But yeah, tell me what you think of this one. Did you like the matchup dependent stuff? Did you like seeing these outright odds? Did you like some kind of other way to approach what Pinnacle's doing? Because I mean, I'm just trying to provide you guys more content. Pinnacle's allowing me a way to do that is beneficial for both of us as parties. And so if you have some crazy idea, I think all of us are going to be open ears to it. And yeah, that's it, guys. Click the link below for Pinnacle. Yeah, click their link. Follow me on Twitter too. As always, being toxic is a choice.